Welcome back to the disturbing side of Reddit. In the subreddit r/Let's Not Meet, countless people share their unusual yet terrifyingly true stories about people you'd definitely never want to meet again. The Redditor, Sweet Mercy, did just that when she shared her experience with a person she met, named Dr. Ramsey. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mum. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course, you're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward, up the back steps, and through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mum, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then, the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home, and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure. Could I be forgetting something? I told him no again, and he frowned, then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out, that was not all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then, one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me, and later, my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there were any stalking laws, there was not a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his from back in the day, who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone. I couldn't play outside. I couldn't walk to Super America, sort of like a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mum and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. They'd seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage, my brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German Shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen he could easily open with a knife from the outside even when it was locked, and about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggled it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at Saints West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French doors swung inward, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television, and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedroom and didn't turn on the light. This way we could see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked, loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring she was not stupid. She could see he didn't have a pizza, and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened, and they walked around the yard, watching for him. They came back in, and things settled down. By now, we'd pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped, so we just went back in, each of us, except my youngest brother, still asleep, carrying a knife from the kitchen, just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, through the doorway into the dining room, at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him, so he went closer to the door to try to see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door. It had 3 rows of 3 windows, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door, then cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see. There on the other side of the window pane was Dr. Ramsey, smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't see him. The next night we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what's wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom 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 on a door or window. Almost immediately after he finished his sentence, boom 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 on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the 2 eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A couple of weeks later, I was at school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name, and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mum. That same day, my mum had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he'd called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after that, I woke up one night, thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a time, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events, and many more, took place over a period of around 18 months. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. For a long time, during and after the Dr. Ramsey days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell my parents that he was going to R-word and unalive me, and later my sister, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. It's such an unsettling story, thinking about those final words she says. It must have been so confusing for her as a child, and incredibly stressful for the rest of her family, knowing what his true intentions were. The comments seem to commend her father for protecting the family, but also in absolute shock that there were no such thing as stalking laws back then, and I must admit, I too am surprised by that. Whatever happened to Dr. Ramsey though, I hope he wasn't able to harm or terrorize other children or families, and he's now just a distant memory for those who had the unfortunate pleasure of meeting him. Our next story takes to the subreddit called Am I the Arsehole? A subreddit for those wanting to find out if they were wrong in an argument that's been bothering them. The user, MorbidMummy11, took to the subreddit to ask fellow Redditors if she was being the arsehole for banning her husband and father-in-law from the delivery room due to their intensely stressful and creepy behaviour during her pregnancy. You'd think this might be because they're being overbearing or not being sympathetic with her struggles as a pregnant woman. But no, her reasoning is just downright terrifying. Her post reads as follows. Lot of context. The character limit cuts off, but here's the gist. My husband and I are expecting our first child, which I knew would be a really sensitive issue, as his own mother died in childbirth with him. We met with a marriage counsellor to talk things through at the beginning, and he swears he's been seeing his own therapist twice a month throughout my pregnancy. I don't want to call him a liar, but I'm fairly sure he's either not going or not talking about the big issue. He and his father, a hugely active part of our lives, are completely convinced that I'm going to die in childbirth. They won't openly admit it, but their behaviour has reached the point where it's constantly making me feel stressed and uncomfortable. When it was husband saying, "Please make sure your life insurance is up to date," and "I'd like you to meet with a lawyer and draft a will," I was like, that's kind of intense, but okay, if that makes you feel better. When husband asked me to go through all of my possessions and inventory, what I wanted to be saved for the baby versus what I would want to be returned to my family in the event of my death, I put my foot down and said absolutely not. Too morbid. No way. My father-in-law, who lives a few blocks away and eats dinner with us 2 to 4 nights a week, got on my case about how I was making things difficult for my husband in the event that he will be a grieving widower with a newborn. I'm just going to add here that I've had a completely complication-free pregnancy and have no reason to think I will die screaming in the coming weeks. When I tell my husband this, he calls me paranoid, but I feel like my father-in-law wants me to die. His whole life identity for the past 35 years has been amazing single dad. Never dated or had close friends, or even hobbies really. And it seems like he's looking forward to being able to guide my husband through what he went through. At this point, I'd honestly be happy to never see my father-in-law again, and I certainly don't want him in the delivery room, especially since he told me he was putting his foot down about me not being allowed to have an epidural or laughing gas. He's a commanding presence, and I know that whatever he wants in the delivery room, he will get. I know people will say, "Oh, L&D nurses would never let that happen," but you haven't met this man. My husband, in addition to backing his dad on everything, acts like my due date is my death date and has completely pulled away from me. Every minute with him is morbid, stressful, and a reminder that our marriage seems to be crumbling. No matter how many times I tell him his behaviour makes me stressed and upset, it's just getting worse, and I do not want it around me while I'm concentrating on giving birth. Do I owe it to my husband to let him stress and upset me during labor? Is his presence at the birth more important than a safe and healthy delivery? My therapist says no, but this whole thing has been so weird I feel like I need some outside perspective. Thoughts? You'd think this would be the end of it, but she explains even further in the comments section. She explains, I've asked if I could join in on a therapy session, and he said no, it's private. When he asked me to start recording videos for the baby about myself and how happy I am that I'm having the baby, I point blank said, I feel like you're envisioning one of those videos a terminally ill parent makes for their kids to watch after their death, and this is one more example of your out of line and concerning behavior. Did your therapist approve this as a healthy coping mechanism? He got really mad at me and said it's totally inappropriate for me to ask what he talks about in therapy, that it's private, and I'm crossing a line and making him not want to go by prying into his personal business. To which one Redditor commented, I am genuinely wondering if he's told his therapist you're dying, and his therapy is proceeding in the basis of that. She also replied to a now deleted comment by saying, not allowed to ask what he talks about in therapy. I'm fairly sure he isn't going at all. Character limit forced me to omit this, but he is a complete mess at my doctor's appointments, has been asking multiple questions about how quickly they can do an emergency C-section if things go south, badgering the doctor to inform me that natural delivery is clearly the only real option, trying to rat on me for eating cheat foods like cheese and ice cream that are terrible for the baby. It's like he's been replaced by a different man. I don't know what to do anymore. He's constantly staring at me wistfully and reminding me of good times in our relationship, telling me he will, not would, be lost without me. His mere presence drives up my heart rate at this point, and I'm still over a month out. Surprisingly, some users were more sympathetic towards the father-in-law and husband than the woman herself. One Redditor commented, "This is the saddest thing I've read in a while. I get that your pregnancy hasn't had any complications, but you're silly if you think emergencies can't happen unexpectedly in the delivery room. This is coming from someone who doesn't even have PTSD from a death during birth. Imagine the devastation you would have went through, and then imagine the possibility of your child having to endure the same. Of course, your father-in-law is trying to mitigate any additional distress on his son. He is probably desperate for it to not end up the same way, and trying everything in his power to have a safety net in place for him. You have no idea what they went through, and I don't know if it's that you're too close to the situation, but your post comes off as super insensitive to this. And just because you don't see your husband making progress doesn't mean he isn't, or that he's not trying. I doubt this is something easily navigated through for him. Not the arsehole for dictating what happens during your medical procedures, but girl, you've got to try to be a bit more sympathetic, and I bet enveloping them in love and reassurance would go a hell of a lot further in calming their overreactions than butting against it. These boys are effing terrified right now." She replied to this comment by saying, "I just feel like I've been as understanding as possible. I scheduled marriage counselling to talk through things when I got pregnant, wanted to keep going, but husband insisted he needed to work through things alone with his own therapist, and I didn't want to push the issue. I honestly don't know if I could be more sensitive without ramping up my own stress level. I caved and did the terminally ill parent recording videos for after their death thing. The issue that was the big impetus for me making this post was my father-in-law swinging by the house to help me pack up all my non-maternity clothes and take them to our storage unit. I was like, by TF no, I'll need those soon. I'm active and healthy and relatively close to my pre-pregnancy size. He called me insensitive for not making things as easy as possible on my husband. Husband came home, saw that my clothes were still in the closet, and got upset with me because we need to be prepared. Genuinely, am I being insensitive here for refusing to take part in the plans for my own death? Should I be supporting my husband by playing along? He won't discuss the stress PTSD thing with me because he says he's working through it with his therapist and won't talk about anything they discuss. Is there anything I'm not seeing here? Things I can do to support my husband that don't involve me actively planning to die screaming from a preventable hemorrhage? This was the last comment left by Morbid Mummy 11 on Reddit. Since then, there have been no updates, no secondary accounts, nothing. The worst part about this is that even if this story is true, how likely would it be that local authorities deem that death during childbirth would be considered foul play? Sure, death during childbirth isn't as common as it once used to be, but it still can and does happen. What if her life was taken by her husband and father-in-law, and her cause of death was simply written off as a maternal death? She even recorded her terminally ill mother videos, as requested by her husband and father-in-law, which they could very easily use as proof that she was already suffering from some form of illness. I guess this is something we'll never know the answer to, but I hope that she was able to either escape from her situation or ensure a safe environment, not only for her baby, but for herself too. Our next post takes us to r/let's not meet. The user, whose account is now deleted, recounts their experience exploring the inside of one of the bridges they leave nearby, in North Wales, UK. What they end up discovering, though, is nothing short of horrific, as shown in the photographs included in the post. This was going to be short, but the memory sprung into my mind a couple days back, and I thought it would be worth sharing. I live in North Wales, UK. For anyone who has had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live, though, for an adolescent boy, it is certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated, in comparison to the closest cities, there is a dual carriageway running right along the coast from Wales into England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. Anyway, there was one night a few years ago when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore the inside of one of these bridges, as one of the group had observed a manhole cover nearby, which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily, as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be of any danger, but definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver, and panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you are confused as to what the hell this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it was rather peculiar. I mean, I would have never known there was even an inside had we not found the manhole. So, as we squeeze and crouch, and at one point scrape along our bellies, to the other side of the structure, there is a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point, you can look down through narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm, in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge, one of us claimed they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine, showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer to it as P word is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page, removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got the F out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you reading this, as we, luckily, never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair, but I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There is easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without somebody taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man, who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently, as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing a wall and do God knows what, that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation. It has just come to my realization that what we unearthed that night has not once been uttered to another soul. As a naive teenager, it was the type of thing you just wanted to forget. But thinking about, we probably should have let the police, or at least someone, know about what was down there, because it wasn't the doings of a healthy-minded individual. So, there you have it. Apologies for the length. I got a little carried away, as it is my first Let's Not Meet post, and I wanted to make the reading experience as similar to the reality as I could. Now I'm a few years older, and hopefully a bit braver. I'm considering going down there again, accompanied of course, to see what effed up stuff might be waiting. This could well happen in the next couple days, and rest assured, I will 100% post an update, as I currently have no job, so time is plentiful. Thanks for reading. As you can imagine, this post gained some serious traction as people were left with so many questions. Thankfully, the original poster came back with some updates. I couldn't convince any mates to come along with me tonight, and I'm sure as hell not going alone, but I've got a couple buddies lined up for tomorrow night. All going to plan, I should have pictures uploaded on Sunday night, GMT, or Monday morning. Cheers. Edit. We are all systems go for later this evening. Edit 2. As promised, here are the photos from the return visit. We went early evening, so there was still plenty of light, and as a result, I have decided to use a simple filter on most of the outdoor shots, simply to reduce the light and give it the eeriness it deserves. Unfortunately, I hadn't adequately conveyed my plans to those accompanying me, and they had presumed I just wanted to check out the small area before the entrance to the passageways, as they had been there before. When I expressed my wishes to navigate through the bridge, they instantly noped the F out of there. As you can imagine, I was massively disappointed. I hope to go back soon with a different bunch of guys, but I can't promise when. Perhaps, if everyone who would like to see the return visit just leaves a single comment saying, "Update," I could reply to you individually, so you don't have to keep checking back. Just wait for a message. Just a thought. Either way, the pictures are definitely worth your time. Thanks again, guys. What you're now looking at is the photos the user shared with their update. The user did share some additional text with some of the images, which I'll read aloud as the images are shown. I had forgotten that the passageways don't actually run all the way through the structure. It is sealed off at the midway point, so the slight dip above the supporting pillar is where the sinisterness took place. This makes me wonder, is there anything untoward on the other side? If you look closely, my friend's left hand can be seen gripping a rung, the rest of him disappearing into the darkness. When you are staring down this passageway, it is virtually complete darkness. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. To give you an idea of the size, you would definitely have to squeeze through this on your stomach. It wouldn't be a super tight squeeze, but it wouldn't be possible to crouch. Also, the slightly raised surface you can see just through this hole is an indicator of what the rest of the passageway leading to the dip looks like. Random raised surfaces and narrow gaps, making it impossible to stand up. The pictures, of course, just added further legitimacy to the user's post, but it left just one major burning question. Why aren't there any images of the fold-away chair, or the newspaper cuttings of the woman? The user posted one further update. Just in case people are actively checking back on this thread, I thought I would explain where I am at with the return visit. Basically, I hadn't realized there would be so much interest, thus I figured I would venture back to the bridge when the opportunity presented itself. However, seeing the amount of update requests and PMs I have received, I have now decided to make this a major priority and will vow to make the return visit ASAP. I won't give an exact day because I don't wish to disappoint, but rest assured I'm fully on the case. Thanks for your patience, and fingers crossed, I can get some decent photos without encountering any evil beings in the vicinity. Watch this space. Now thankfully, the user didn't disappoint and returned with a separate post titled, "The Bridge Revisited." It reads as follows. For any of you guys who missed the original post, you can find it here. Early yesterday evening, a friend and I decided to embark on the revisit to this awful place in the hope of finding some remnants of the twisted scene that had been stumbled upon several years ago. We were not disappointed. If anything, it was even worse than I had imagined. Aside from what you will see in the photos, the general environment within the bridge structure is practically uninhabitable, as it bloody well should be, and stomach-turning to say the least. The amount of dust in the passageways is actually quite unbearable, but that is nothing compared to the constant stench that must be endured. Also, the heat didn't help the situation either. I won't ramble on, but I must express how vulnerable you feel when navigating through the tunnels. Even with two of us, both carrying appropriate weaponry, the sense of evil was overpowering. The tension is amplified tenfold by the fact that, had we encountered someone or something, the layout of the structure and the multiple tight squeezes mean a safe, speedy exit is nigh on impossible. It truly is a hellhole. Without further ado, here is what lies in the bridge. Enjoy. Instantly, we came across what appeared to be a makeshift bed. The sheet accompanying the foam suggested it would have been used to sleep on. Going further into the passageway, it opens up slightly. I included this to demonstrate the amount of dust particles in the air. It was quite a pain to get any clear photos from any sort of distance other than close-ups. This is the broken padlock that I believe would have originally secured the entry. Not even a third of the way through the bridge at this point. A used candle. Random piece of rope. Now this is where things get a bit disgusting. That liquid definitely wasn't milk. That's a standard milk container in the UK. And here was the first confirmation that the intense smell we were experiencing was in fact human feces. The brown substance on the paper was undeniable. This was the second, more damning confirmation. A bag with loads of human feces. This nearly made us vomit. Just as we approached the end room, we stumbled upon this disconcerting tape. It reads, "Crime scene, do not enter." The narrow entrance to the final opening. At this stage, even with two powerful torches, you honestly could not see if there was anyone, anything in the end room. This makes for a particularly nervy decision to proceed. Here you can see how tight this section is. Not fun. The entrance to the end room, taken with no flash to get an idea of what this may have looked like in candlelight, which we presumed must have been the light source for this sick individual. Truly, the stuff of nightmares. All of the following images were taken inside this room. Here goes nothing. Literally, the first thing I see after squeezing into the end room is a knife. Oh crap. Next up is this raunchy image. You may not be able to see it properly, but the vaginal area has been burnt through with a cigarette. It is only a small hole, hence you may struggle to see, but very strange nonetheless. More magazine pages on the floor. You can tell from the black sticky tape, these would have once been stuck to the wall. A random pile of items, including scissors, tape, and a brush of some sort. A rather large nail. This could have simply been part of the structure at one point, but after closer inspection of the surrounding area, it did seem to be an anomaly. This candle had been melted into place onto the wall. I imagine it would have been the main light source. The only remaining page still attached to the wall. This, unfortunately, is not the image I described in the original post. If you zoom in, the top of the page has a date from 1997, suggesting this stuff has been here for a long time. And here it is, folks. The Devil's Chair. There was so much dust in this area that I simply couldn't get a decent flash shot. Another attempt. Here you can see the bundle of items to the left and a blanket of some sort to the right. We searched thoroughly, but rather worryingly, the blood-soaked condom was nowhere to be found. This was strange, given the other items had remained. This is a god-awful place to be. This is what you would see if the chair was facing the other way round. You can see how the steps open up so you could stand up, and also how it would be easy for somebody to hide in waiting in this area. The same image, just using torchlight, to give you an idea of how dark this would have been, even with candles. A bit of proof, if you will, that this trip actually took place. Nobility Scooter 2012. Very glad to be leaving, the final shot I took from inside the structure, just before the exit ladder. And this was the lovely view that greeted us as we popped our heads out. I thought I would include this as it did well to brighten our mood, and hopefully will do the same for you. Thank you all for reading and being patient whilst I found the time to make the return visit. Hope you enjoyed it. Reading through this and having a look through these photos sends shivers down my spine. It literally just looks like a hellhole. I really do commend for the user having gone there not once, but twice to take all of these photos and share them in the Let's Not Meet subreddit. It really does make you wonder what other places exist in the world where people are too scared to venture. What atrocities might lie in such places? It's something I'm not sure I really want to think about. Our final story of the day comes from the user, R.W. Bingham. In the subreddit, Ask Reddit, a user asked, "What is the creepiest true story someone has ever told you?" R.W. Bingham wrote the following. "It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story, since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward, first date, and around the time that they would have said, 'Good night,' the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place, since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and started hiking under just the light of the stars, since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling, since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late. He ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsing of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling at what was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail like he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what this soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body, and for some reason, just turn around and walk away. This comment is so short, yet so incredibly shocking. Could you imagine not only coming up so close to Ted Bundy, one of the world's most infamous serial killers, but also stumbling into one of his poor, lifeless victims? It's incredible how so many people around the world, including myself, who have had that gut feeling, press deeper into you, pressing further and further, telling you something just isn't right. I'm glad they listened to that feeling and walked away to safety, but I also wonder what would have happened had they spotted Ted Bundy and potentially the body. Could they have aided in his capture sooner by spotting him? I guess. This is something we will never know. As we finish this episode of The Disturbing Side of Reddit, I would like to ask that you please take a moment to appreciate the light in your life, even as we explore the darkness that exists both online as well as around us. Stay safe out there, and until next time, farewell.